Hey everyone! In today's video we're gonna learn some very interesting traps that you can play in the Ponziani. So after e4, e5, knight to f3 and knight to c6, here by far the most common moves are bishop to c4 or bishop to b5, but you can try the move c3, which is quite interesting and not that common. The main idea is to simply go d4, and if black recaptures, we're gonna capture back on d4 with the pawn having a very strong center. So let's start with the first trap. For white, I will show you a very nice trap for black at the end of the video. So here, the most common move for black is knight to f6, a very natural developing move. Now we're gonna go for d4. And here black has three main options that we're going to cover. Let's start with the first one, which is the move d6, trying to hold the center, which makes a lot of sense. And here we're gonna play the move bishop to a2, which seems like a very quiet move, even blundering a pawn. But the main point is that after black takes on e4, we're gonna play d5, we attack the knight, and after the knight moves, let's say to e7, here we go queen to a4, we get a check, and we attack the knight on e4, we get a fork, and we're going to win a piece. This is actually the most common tactic in the opening. I have a separate video about it that you might want to check after watching this video. So let's move on to the second trap. After knight to f6 and d4, here black has other options. If black takes on d4, then we're gonna go e5, and after knight to d5, we're gonna capture back on d4. We have a very comfortable position. And the other alternative, which is the most common move in the position, is to take the pawn on e4. And here we're not going to capture the pawn on e5, we're gonna go d5. Attacking the knight, first of all, the very basic trap is that if the knight goes to the edge of the board, then after b4, we're gonna win a piece. The knight on a5 is trapped. Knight to b8 is an option, it's a bit passive, that's why black normally goes knight to e7, planning to reroute the knight. And here we're gonna capture on e5, and in this position, black might be tempted to kick away this very strong knight with d6, but it is actually a losing move, because now we can go bishop to b5, we give a check, and there's no good way for black to block the check. After bishop to d7, we're gonna simply capture on d7, black might try c6, but here we're gonna take on c6, if black captures, we're gonna capture back. Black is in no time to capture the knight because we're gonna take on b7, giving a check. So here black might try the move queen to b6, planning to counterattack. This is very often a good idea. Counterattacking and planning to take on f2, giving a checkmate. So we have to be a bit careful, but here we're gonna simply take on b7, giving a check, and after the king moves, white has a few options. White could even take on c8 with a check, but there's a very nice under promotion here. After knight takes f7, king to c7, we're in no time to take on a8 and promote to a queen, because queen takes f2 would be a checkmate. But here we're gonna under promote to a knight, and we get a royal fork, so white is collecting a lot of material. So after knight takes e4, d5, knight to e7, knight takes e5, d6 is a very bad move, that's why black here normally goes knight to g6. And in this position we could take on g6, white has a perfectly playable position, but there's a very interesting try for white to invite black to go wrong, which is the move bishop to d3. We develop and we attack the knight on e4. Here the best continuation for black is to take on e5, and then we're gonna capture on e4. We get a fairly equal position, but black might be tempted to play an intermediate move by taking on f2. So before taking on e5, if we take on f2, black now would take on e5. But here we have a very nice tactic, which is the move bishop takes g6. And if black captures on d1, now we take on f7, and after king to e7, bishop to g5, king to d6. We could even take on d8, but we could also try to checkmate black's king after knight to c4, king to c5. We play knight b to a3. Now b4 checkmate is a huge threat, so black is in no time to take on g5. And although black might temporarily prevent the checkmate by taking on c3, now we can take on d8, and we have an extra piece and a crashing position. Now after bishop takes g6, black might try bishop to c5, defending the knight, but here after the move queen to e2, the game is pretty much over. We plan to give a discover check with knight to c6, attacking the queen. Black might try queen to e7, but now here we're gonna take on f7. We have an extra piece. If black plays the move king to d8, here we could even play a fancy tactic after bishop to e6. The point is that if black takes the rook or the bishop, now we can go bishop to g5, pinning the queen, and after queen takes and knight to f7, we're going to collect black's queen. So against the move knight to f6, we have a lot of traps as white. Another main line for black is to go d5, and here the main move by white is queen to a4, planning to take on e5, since the knight on c6 is now pinned. Here black has a few options. f6 is a common move to defend the pawn on e5, but here black might take on e4, and after knight takes, attacking c6. One common move by black here is the move queen to d5, defending the knight and the pawn. And after knight takes, here black should take on c6, and black could try to fight for an advantage, white has the better pawn structure. Or if black is careless, after queen takes c6, here we're gonna go bishop to b5, and we're going to win black's queen. And before I move on to black's trap, if you want to get better at chess besides learning opening traps, I have a free course that will provide you with a training plan for that, so feel free to check the link in the description. So let's now rotate the board and focus on black's side. So after the move c3 and knight to c6, d4 is the main line. Knight takes c4 and d5. With correct play, black should equalize by going knight to e7 and then knight to g6. But as we saw, white can set up some interesting traps along the way. But here black has a very aggressive and sharp move, which is the move bishop to c5, putting pressure on f2, but sacrificing a piece. White doesn't have anything better than to take the piece. And after d takes, bishop takes, king to e2. Now black goes bishop to b6, and we have a very crazy position that should be balanced with correct play, but white can go wrong very easily. So black's idea is to go knight to f2, forking the queen and the rook. Let's evaluate some alternatives. White might be tempted to take another pawn, for example taking on d7, but after bishop takes, now we have additional ideas like bishop to b5. If white is greedy and keeps on collecting material, for example after knight takes, bishop to b5, we give a check. Even though white might block the check with the move c4, now we're gonna counter with queen to f6, and this position is actually falling apart for white. Queen to f2 is an idea, also rook to d8 will come. The king on e2 is actually very badly placed. So let's evaluate other alternatives for white. So black gave a minor piece for 2 pawns, but in return, the king is not very well placed. Bishop to e3 might be another idea to prevent knight to f2. Here we're gonna take on c6 with the b pawn. Bishop to a6 is now another idea in the position. And if white wants to trade pieces and then take on e5, here we're gonna castle. And rook to e8 will come, so the attack on the king is still going. For example, after knight to f6, rook to e8, planning a discover check, for example knight takes e3, will collect the queen. White might try something like queen to c2. There's no need to rush with the check. Here black has a few options. Knight to g3, giving a double check and then picking up the rook on h1 is good enough. Also d5, planning bishop to f5 will leave black with a much better position. So if you get this position after bishop takes f2 and bishop to b6, if your opponent is not prepared, you will most likely get a crushing position. But let me show you the best way to go for white, which is the move queen to d5. In a way it makes a lot of sense, counter-attacking. And here the position remains very complicated after knight to f2. White still has to be a bit careful, for example after queen takes and king to f8. This position is still very dangerous for white. Instead here white can take on b7, and after bishop takes, queen takes and knight takes, we get a very crazy position with a lot of imbalances where anything can happen. So hope that you enjoyed these traps and that you can use them in your games. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.